Begin today at the Mishnah on the Chesam with Beis, the Mishnah towards the bottom of the Yamod. Zakt Eilige Mishnah. This is continuing from a point that we spoke about before here. The Mishnah says, Ein Chayovin, when the Bezdin Paskins and made a mistake, they won't be Chayiv al on the following cases, which is Shmias Kail, which is when a person said false testimony, Val Bitis V'sayim, a person that swore falsely, Val Tumas Mikdash V'Kedashav, and a person that was Tomei and walked into the Beis HaMikdash or ate from Kachim. What's unique about all these cases is that there's no regular carbon chatas for this. The carbon that's brought for this is called a carbon oila v'yared. That means it depends if the person's rich or poor. There's three different levels of carbonas that you can bring. So regarding these cases, there is no halacha of a par helam davar shel tzibur when the bezdin made a mistake. This halacha actually the Mishnah already said before, but the Mishnah is bringing this because it just wants to continue and bring the next halacha, the next point where there's a machlokes. V'hanasi kayotze b'hem. Similar regarding the nasi, which is the king. By him as well, there's no carbon oila v'yared in all these cases. So that's the Tanakama says the nasi will be the same. Or actually, it's different. Rabbi Yossi Aglili. This is Rabbi Yossi Aglili speaking. Rabbi Kiva says hanasi chayav b'kulam. In essence, really, for the carbon oila v'yared, the king will be chayav to bring these kind of karbanas. Chutz, but there's one case which will not be applicable by a king, and that is mishmiyas hakel. Saying false testimony is not something which is applicable to a king. Why? Because the rule with a king is shahamelech loydon v'loydon. A king is not a judge, and he's not going to be judged in a court case. Loy meid, he doesn't testify. V'loy midinaisai, and there's no testimony against him. And this is explained. The Gemara Sanhedrin explains it's the kind of Chazal, some of this. But the point is that if a king is not testifying, so there's no application of the king saying false testimony. So therefore, this carbon oil regarding false testimony does not apply to a king. So the Gemara, my time with Rabbi Yossi Aglili, what's the source of Rabbi Yossi Aglili? By a nasi, he doesn't bring this carbon, which is a melech. He doesn't bring this carbon of oil v'yared. Makra, because by the pasuk where it speaks about the carbon of oil v'yared, it says in the pasuk, "V'hoya ki yesham la'achas me'ela." If you will do the avera of one of these mentioned in the pasuk out of these four, which is the carbon of oil v'yared, so then the pasuk says that he brings this kind of carbon. So what do we see from this language? La'achas me'ela, kol shem is chayiv ba'achas. One that could be chayiv in one of them is chayiv b'kulam. He'll be chayiv in all of them. But she'eim is chayiv ba'achas. If there's one of them that he's excluded from, eim is chayiv b'kulam. That he's not going to be chayiv in any of them. So the king, he's excluded from one of them. He cannot bring this carbon regarding false testimony. So therefore, he's going to be excluded completely from any of the options of bringing a carbon oil v'yared. In fact, the Gemara, how do you know to read and interpret the pasuk this way? Say the opposite. Ve'eim mischayev ba'achas mehen. The pasuk when it says yesham le'achas me'ela is saying the exact opposite. That if someone did avera just by one of them, va'afapi she'em mischayev b'kulan. Even if he's not an individual that could be chayev by all of them, then he brings a carbon for that one. Adarabah, the simple lashon of the pasuk is mashma, that it's saying that even if you just could be chayev by one of them, that's enough. You'll be chayev for that one. So from where does Rabbi Yossi know to exclude the king, the nasi, from all of these kinds of karbanis of that's oil v'yared? So therefore, Ella says the Gemara time with Rabbi Yossi mehocha. The source of Rabbi Yossi is from what it says in the Brayse. The Tanya, Hoya Rabbi Yirmiyah said, Nemar, it says by the carbon oil v'yared, loy sagia yodai. That what happens if you can't afford to bring the expensive carbon, which is an animal for carbon? So then he brings birds. Then the pasuk goes on to say furthermore, V'nemar, it also says again, loy sasig yodai, that if you can't even afford to bring birds, then he brings carbon mincha from flour. So what do we see here? Mi shabali day aniyas vashiris. That this carbon of oil v'yared only applies by an individual that it's possible for him to be poor or rich. Yotza nasi, therefore that excludes a king. Or Mashiach, and also the Kayim Mashiach, Kayim Gadol Mashiach, she'eim ba'in day aniyas. Both of them are not individuals that ever come to be poor. Why is this? Because Nasi, when it says in the Torah Nasi, who's the Nasi? It says about the Nasi, he did one of these mitzvahs, or he was over on one of these mitzvahs of Hashem Elikov. What's the expression here of Hashem Elikov? Misha ein al gabav el Hashem alikov. The nasi that we're speaking about is the ultimate nasi, which is the king. He's higher than everyone else, and the only one that's above him is the Eibishter. So therefore, from the language of the pasuk, we know we're speaking about a king. If we're speaking about the king that has all the treasures, it's not shaykh to say that he would ever be poor. So therefore, this carbon doesn't apply to him. Now, Mashiach, regarding the Kohen Gadol, that's anointed, the pasuk says, "Kohen hagadol me'echav," that he's greater than his brothers. What does this mean? Shehu begadol me'echav. He's greater than them benoi in his beauty, bekoyach in his power, in his might, bechachma in his wisdom, ubeoisher, and in riches as well. And Achedim Oimrim, others Achedim say that Minayim, from here we learn out, from where do we know, Shem Ein Loi, if he doesn't have riches on his own, then Gadleyu Mishal that his brothers, the Kainim, have to make sure that he's rich. Talmud Loima, V'Kayin Hagadol Meyachav, Asher Yitzchak Aroishay, the Kayin Gadol, greater than Meyachav means he becomes rich from his brothers. Gadleyu Meyachav, they're the ones that make him rich. So therefore the Kayin Gadol is not someone that could ever be poor. So based on this, some of the Farshim say that this means that he has to be rich all the time when he's a Kohen Gadol, not just when he's appointed, but all the time. And also from the Gemara here, it's mashma that this halacha, this specific halacha that we're saying, it would apply not only by a Kohen Mashiach, but by any Kohen Gadol, because this halacha that a Kohen Gadol is rich is not only in that time period when the Kohen Gadol was anointed with the Shemen HaMishcha. Even later, the Kohen Merubah Begodim that has 8 Begodim also had to be rich. So Ravina asks from Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak the following Gibaya. Nasi, a king, shenitztara. He became now a Mitzayre. If he becomes a Mitzayre, he is demoted. He can't be a king anymore. So as Rashi brings the source for this in the pasuk, Vayinaga Hashem es HaMelech, and afterwards he became a Mitzayre and he sat in his place, Chofshis, he was freed from his kingdom. So Mahu, what's the halacha with this individual? If this king, he was a king, but now he's a Mitzayre and he's not a king. And now he does one of these Averis, which the carbon would be Oileviyated. What do I say about this? Do I say Mitchi Dochi? That once he was a king, so now he gets completely pushed off of this kind of carbon, and that applies always, even later on when he's not a king anymore. Oh, he mifta pater. Or I say no, while he is a king, so then he's exempt. At that time, he's going to be exempt of the carbon. But later on, he's not. His status changed. Now he's a mitzayda. So therefore, now he will have to bring the carbon for this kind of aveda of oileviyated. So Amalei Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak answers: Diloch, this king, is he even after he becomes a mitzayda? Is he taking money from you, or the Gaza, or does he still have access to take money from the treasures that he had access to when he was a king? Very short answer. In other words, Rashi explains what the answer he's saying is, it doesn't matter that he was demoted from being a king, but he still has access, apparently. He still has access to the treasures, and therefore the point that we said before, that he's rich, is still applicable. And therefore, he's not going to have to bring a carbon. That's Rashi's pshat, but there are other Rishonim that say the opposite, that what the Gemara is saying is that when he was a king, Diloch, he was not only able to access the treasures, but he was able to continue collecting taxes. Because he's the king that can collect taxes. But now, after he's demoted, even if he has still access to the treasures, but he can't collect taxes anymore. So eventually the money, the treasures that he has could run out. So therefore now, you can't say that he's on a level where he could never be poor again. Lavdafka, he can't collect taxes anymore. He may become poor. So therefore he will have to bring the carbon. Tanya in Abraisa we learned, so over here, we mentioned that the Kohen Gadol, the Kohen Mashiach, is together with the Nasi, that this carbon oil of Yered is not shaykh to him because he can't become poor. But there's another opinion, Rabbi Kiva. In Abraisa we learned Rabbi Kiva, and Rabbi Kiva says, Mashiach potter mikulam, that the Kohen Mashiach is potter from bringing all of these carbonis that are mentioned here, the carbon oil of Yered. And Omar Rave, so Rave said, my time the Rabbi Kiva. What's the source of Rabbi Kiva? Omar Kra, because the pasuk says, Ze carbon aren ubonov. This is the carbon. This is speaking about the carbon mincha, asiris ha'ephod. This is a special carbon mincha that the Kohen Gadol has to bring every day. So it says, Ze carbon aren ubonov. This is the carbon of mincha that Aaron and his children, when they're a Kohen Gadol, have to bring. What do I learn from here? What's the Ze? Zuba chayva. It's this kind of carbon mincha that the Kohen has an obligation to bring every day. Chayva loy, that is. But ve'ein acheres ba chayva loy. There could be no other scenario where there would be a carbon mincha where the Kohen Gadol would be obligated to bringing it. So therefore, if you're going to say that a kohen brings the carbon oil v'yated, what would that mean? That he has to also perhaps bring a carbon mincha if he would be poor. So that's also an option. So the fact that he's not chayiv to bring any other carbon mincha than the daily asira sa'efa that he brings, so that means that he can't be chayiv in the carbon of oil v'yated. But the Gemara asks on this, how do you know that he's excluded completely? Why wouldn't I say, ki dali dalos? What is the Torah saying that he does not have to bring, that if he's on the lowest level, in the bracket, he's totally poor, then he doesn't bring the carbon mincha for the oil v'yated. My new, what is that? Asira seifa, this measurement of flour that's brought for this carbon. But there's still another two levels of the carbon oil v'yated. For one that's poor, but not that poor, and he can bring a bird, or a shiris, he's rich, and he can bring the animals. Maybe there the Torah does not exclude him from this carbon by the Kohen Gadol. He says, you see here, Rabbi Akiva does not hold of the point that we said before that the Kohen Gadol could never be poor, and that's why he doesn't bring this carbon at all. This is not the Rabbi Akiva is bringing here another source for this. Okay, so the Gemara says, Lo yisal kedaitach. No, you can't make this distinction. Why? Because the pasuk says that v'chiper olav hakohen al chatosai shechata meyachas meila. By the carbon oil v'yered, it says the kohen will atone for him for one of these avedas that he did meyachas meila, from one of these avedas. What does this mean? Ha-miskaper ba'achas, miskaper b'kulon. One that could get a kapara with each one of these options that the Torah says here. So then I say he's chayiv to bring any of them, all of them. But if there's one of them that he can't bring, as we learned out before, we excluded that the Kohen Gadol will not bring the mincha, and when he's totally poor, then he's not chayiv to bring any of the options of the carbon oil v'yered, even if he's rich. Okay, so that's what you learn out from this term of me'achas me'ela. So the Gemara asks on this, but if that's the case, ela me'ata. But if so, when it says in the pasuk, now this is the pasuk that it says regarding all of the karbonis of oil v'yered. So hachanami, why wouldn't I say here as well, Tuchol hamischayev ba'achas, mischayev b'kulan. This is the pasuk that the Gemara tried to bring before, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, to explain regarding the nasi. Why a king does not bring the carbon oil v'yered. So now the Gemara is bringing back that pasuk, because according to Rabbi Akiva, it seems like this is a drasha that he darshans. So again, when it says la'achas me'ele, so hachanami, Rabbi Akiva should darshan here as well. The cholam mischayev ba'achas, mischayev b'kulon. Only an individual that can bring each one of these, then it'll be chayev in all of them. But v'she'em is chayev ba'achas. But if one of these avedas of oil v'yered does not apply to him, eim is chayev b'kulon, he shouldn't bring any. What is the Gemara saying? So again, the drasha the Gemara said before regarding the king, that since a king cannot bring a carbon for saying false testimony, because a king doesn't say edus. So therefore, one of the karbanis of oil v'yered don't apply to him, so none of them should apply to him. That's what the Gemara attempted to say before. Now, according to Rabbi Akiva, we should say that drasha, as we see Rabbi Akiva himself uses this kind of a drasha regarding the carbon oil v'yered by the Kohen Gadol, in the words ma'achas me'ele. So if so, the question is, Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah clearly said not so. Alamet now, why did it say in the Mishnah? Rabbi Akiva argued with Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Akiva says, Nasi chayiv, that Nasi does have to bring all the karbanos of oil v'yered, chutz mishmias kail. Only one he doesn't bring is the one that's not applicable to him, which is he can't say any false testimony. That's the Gemara. There's a difference over here. Abai v'Rava damri tavayu. So Abai and Rava both said that there's a difference. Ma'achas mashmalei. The drasha of me'achas me'ele, that is a drasha that Rabbi Akiva darshans to pater him from the carbon oil v'yered by the Kohen Gadol. But la'achas loy mashmalei. But this drasha of la'achas me'ele, that he does not learn out. Now, the Gemara explains what's the difference between them. The difference here is not whether it's a mem or a lamed. That's not the point. The Gemara here explains. Why is it that this drasha of me'achas me'ele, he darshans this point that only if you can bring all, then he's chayev, but if you can't bring each one of them, he won't. So the answer is because of the place where it's written. Because the Kosvei Rachmana LeBesaif, the Torah wrote this lashon of me'achas me'ele, where in the end when it's talking about the carbon mincha. Gabe Asir Seifa, when it speaks about Asir Seifa, which is the carbon mincha. Why? Lememre, because it's writing it specifically there to tell you. The chol the mechayev Asir Seifa, mechayev b'kula. If you could bring this carbon mincha, then you'll be chayev in all of the other options as well. That's why the Torah wrote it specifically there. The point of the Gemara is I see it ready from another place. The Torah writes the miyut that a Kohen Gadol does not bring any other carbon mincha. Besides his daily carbon mincha, he doesn't bring any other ones. I see already that drush in another place. In this pasuk, where the Torah is being medayik to put in the words me'achas me'ela there regarding the carbon mincha. Why? So you should understand the connection to see that if he cannot bring this one, then he doesn't bring any. Because the isal kedaitach mischayev ba'achas. If you would say that Adarabba, the kavanah of the Torah is to say, like the Gemara concluded before, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, that if you could only bring even one of them, then you're chayiv to bring any of them. So then why wouldn't it say this regarding the case of not only the Asira Seifa? Why wouldn't it say this by the dalos, which is when you bring birds, or inami ba'ashiras, when he brings a carbon? The fact that the Torah is writing this drasha over here to say that only the one that all types, all four types of Oila v'Yered apply to him. Where did the Torah choose to say it? By that drasha of the carbon mincha, where we already have also another drasha that speaks about the subject of this carbon mincha. That shows that it's coming to say that the Kohen Gadol, where not all the options of Oila v'Yered apply to him, so then none of them apply to him. That's how White Rabbi Akiva darshans dafka this. This is a Mishnah that sort of concludes many of the details of the halachas that we learned here in this Perek. So, kol ha-mitzvahs shebeteiresh chayavin al zadoin and kares, all mitzvahs or averis, that if you're over on this, then the punishment is kares, val shigigos and chatos, and then b'sheigig it's a carbon chatos. So, what kind of a carbon do you bring? Hayachid, if it's an individual that did this, maybe kizba seira. You bring either a lamb or a goat, which is an akeva. Va'anasi, if it's the king, then his carbon chatas is different. Sa'ir, he brings a zachar, a goat. Umashiach, ubezdin, if it's the kayim Mashiach that paskin wrong, or the bezdin that paskin wrong, and the tzibur followed, then meviim par. Then they bring this a bull, par helam davashul tzibur. That's regarding all of the Avedas that are Kodesh. If it's regarding Avedah Zareh, what is the carbon? Hayachid v'Nasi v'Mashiach. All the three of them, they are individuals on whatever level, whether it's a plain individual or a king or the Kohen Gadol. Mivi and Seira. The carbon that they bring is a goat and a keva. Or Bezdin, and when the Bezdin paskined wrong regarding Avedah Zareh and the people followed, then they bring a par v'sar, two karbonis, a bull and a goat. Par la'oila, v'sar la'chatos. One is a oila, one is a chatos. Now, Osham Toloi, the halacha regarding Osham Toloi, where a person did an Aveda and he's not sure whether he ate this fats, for example, the forbidden fats or not. So who brings an Osham Toloi? Hayachid v'hanasi chayavin. An individual and a king are both chayiv in this. Umashiach, ubezdin, but the Kohen Gadol. And the Bezdin, Peturin, apart from this. The Gemara before already brought this and brought the drashas for this. Now, Osham Vadai, the cases where you chayiv an Osham, not because of a suffix, where you chayiv an Osham before an Aveda that you did, the Osham Vadai, Hayachid, V'hanasi, Ve'amashiach, Chayavin. So all three of them are going to be chayiv in this. They're individuals. But Bezdin, but if it's the Bezdin, the pasket for the Tzibur, and the Tzibur relied on the Bezdin Peturin, they'll be potter in such a case of this Par Hel and Davashal Tzibur. Okay, now the other category, which we spoke about already before as well, this is the karbanis which are oila v'yared, al shmiyas hakelva bitis v'sayim, if it's regarding false testimony or false swearing falsely. Val tumas mikdash kadosh, or the one that entered into the base of mikdash tamei or ate from the kachim when he's tamei. So these karbanis are oila v'yared, bezdin peturim. The bezdin will be potter from this par helam davashal tzibur. V'hayachid, v'hanasi, v'hamashiach. So the Tana of this Mishnah holds, not like the opinion before, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, the Tana of this Mishnah holds that whether it's an individual, king, or the Kohen Gadol, chayavin, will be chayiv in all this. Ela, she'ein Kohen Gadol Mashiach chayiv, there's one exception. The Kohen Gadol will not be chayiv al tumas mikdash v'kadoshav. If it's regarding this, that he walked into the Beis HaMikdash or ate from kachim when he was tamei, for that the Kohen Gadol does not bring a carbon. Divrei Rab Shimon. That's Rab Shimon's opinion. The Gemara will bring the source why this is an exception. And what's the carbon that they bring? That we just said, everybody, all of them, the Yachid, the Nasi, Mashiach, they all bring a carbon on this. They bring the regular carbon oil v'yared. They bring the carbon oil v'yared just like an individual. The Kohen Gadol will also bring. Rabbi Eliezer says, Hanasi mevi soir. The Nasi is an exception, and he brings a goat, a Zachar goat, and the Gemara will bring the source for what Rabbi Eliezer says. Okay, so the Gemara begins with a braise. Tanya, we learned in a braise Rab Shimon Hayu Noisim Klal. Rab Shimon gave the following rule to remember that Kol Shayachid Basham Talui. In any case where a yachid, it's a kind of avere, where there's a din of asham talui, hanasi kayetzebay. Regarding the nasi, a king, he'll have the same halacha to bring this asham talui. Mashiach ubezdin. However, the Kohen Gadol and the bezdin paturin, they will be pater in such a case. V'chol shuhu ba'asham vadai. But if it's a case where we're speaking about not a asham talui but a asham vadai, then Nasi and Mashiach kayetze behen, then both the Nasi and Mashiach is like every individual that brings this asham, ubezdin peturim, and only the bezdin will be pater. Now, Shmiyas, again, here's the category again, the category where the carbon is not a set carbon, but it's oil b'yedid. Shmiyas akayel bitis v'sayim tumas migdash kadashav. So over here, this is all the carbon oil b'yedid. Bezdin peturin. The bezdin is pater for this, but Nasi u'Mashiach chayavin. But any individual, including the Nasi and the Kayim Mashiach, will be chayiv. Ella, there's one exception. She'ein Nasi chayiv b'shmiyas akayel. Regarding the king, as we explained before already, the king does not say any testimony, so he's not chayav for false testimony. And also there's an exception regarding the Kohen Gadol. V'loy Mashiach b'tumas migdash v'kadashav. As Rab Shimon said in the Mishnah, Rab Shimon here is saying that the Kohen Mashiach does not bring a carbon for tumah in the Beis HaMikdash or eating kachim that are tameh. Now, kol shu ba'oil v'yayred. Anytime the carbon is an oil v'yayred, nasi kayetzebay. The nasi brings this carbon. Mashiach ubezdin peturin. But regarding any carbon of oil v'yayred, the Kayim Mashiach and the Bezdin will be pater. There's the lashon of the Braisa. So the Gemara asks, the last two cases of the Braisa seems to clearly be contradicting itself. Haguf akashi, you have right here a clear contradiction because Amrit, first you say She'ei Mashiach chayev b'tumas migdash kadasha, that the Kohen Gadol he brings all the karbanis of oil v'yayred. The only exception is regarding tumah in the Beis HaMikdash or eating kachim. So that means betumas migdash v'kadashav with the pater. It's only on that he's pater. Al b'shmiyas hakol b'bitis v'sayim. The other two options, which is false testimony or swearing falsely, chayiv. Over there he is chayiv for that carbon. But then aim is safer. The next thing that Rab Shimon says is that kol shehu ba'oil v'yayred, any oil v'yayred, nasi kayetzebay, the nasi does bring it, but Mashiach ubezdin. But if it's a Kohen Gadol or the bezdin that made a mistake about this, peturin. They're going to be pater in any oil v'yayred. So Katani here it says Mashiach ubezdin peturin, that the Kohen Mashiach and the bezdin is completely pater of any oil v'yayred. So that means that ma bezdin peturin mikulhain. Just like regarding the bezdin, we say that none of the cases of the oil v'yayred applies to the bezdin, that they would have to bring this par. So if Mashiach pater mikul, and now we're saying that the Kohen Mashiach is pater from all of it as well. Kashina Dodi, so it's a contradiction here in the two halachas that Rab Shimon said in this Braise. Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yeshua. So Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yeshua answers, Lo kasha. It's not a contradiction. It depends how poor he is. Kan bedalus. Over here, it's where he's poor, but he's not on the lowest level of poverty. He can still bring at least a bird for a carbon, or even if he's richer. So in such cases, if he can bring an animal, or he can bring a bird, for that he actually will be chayav. Because the Kohen Gadol is only excluded from the drasha that we said before, that he doesn't bring another carbon mincha besides his daily carbon mincha. So therefore, kan bedali dalos. When does it say that he's excluded from all of them? It's when he's completely poor and he could only bring the carbon mincha. Then I say that a carbon mincha the Kohen Gadol does not bring besides his daily carbon mincha. Now the Gemara clarifies, what does this mean? Because before in the Gemara, we said that once he can't bring the carbon mincha, he doesn't bring any other carbonis either. That's how Rabbi Akiva darshaned it. So the Gemara says, Rab Shimon, Savala, Rabbi Akiva b'chadeh. He holds like Rabbi Akiva is drasha in one detail that we darshan from that pasuk that says that he only brings one daily mincha and there's no other mincha that he brings, and therefore he's not chayav for that lowest level of carbon oil v'yayred. But he argues in another detail. Savala Rabbi Akiva bedali. Dalos the pater. He also Rabbi Akiva regarding the lowest level of bringing a mincha for the oil v'yayred that'll be pater. But but he argues in him once he's a level up to bring a bird or to bring even more to bring a regular carbon. For that he doesn't darshan that drasha that Rabbi Akiva darshan meyachas meile. That drasha he disagrees with him. Can be poor. So apparently, according to Rabbi Akiva, that point, for some reason, Rabbi Akiva doesn't hold to this. Yeah. So the Gemara Elisha Kohen Gadol Chayiv. So the Mishnah said that the Kohen Gadol, according to Rab Shimon, is not chayiv to bring a carbon for the Tumah in the Beis Hamikdash. Why specifically this is an exception? Amar Chizkiya says, my time with Rab Shimon. What's the source of Rab Shimon? The pasuk says that v'nichlisa, regarding a person that goes into the Beis Hamikdash when he's tamei, v'nichlisa nefesh mitoich ha kohol. It says he gets kares. But here it adds, not like other places, it says, what's the kares mitoich ha-kol, from amongst the congregation. Why is it adding this? It's saying, Misha karbonei shaveh l'kohol. That's only for an individual that his carbon is equal together with the rest of the kohol. What is this referred to? On Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, there was the carbon that was brought in the Beis Hamikdash to be mechaper, for walking to the Beis Hamikdash when you tamei. So if you are an individual that's together with the rest of the kohol, the rest of the congregation, then the chiyuv of the carbon oil v'yored will also apply to you. Yatzazeh shein karboni shavu l'kol. However, the Kohen Gadol, this that he on Yom Kippur gets a kapara for when it's unknown regarding walking to the Beis Hamikdash tamei, he has a separate carbon. As we learned in Masechta Shavuos, if I remember, there's the carbon, there's a sword, I think, that's brought for the Yidden on Yom Kippur, then there's a par that's brought for the Kohen Gadol. It's a separate, so because he's separated in that carbon, therefore, also regarding the carbon oil v'yored, when he knows and he has to bring it, it doesn't apply to the Kohen Gadol. So if you're darshing this, imkein nasi nami. So I should say regarding the king as well, that I see that ein karbonei shava l'kol, that the king does not bring the same kind of carbon. Not regarding Yom Kippur, but regarding a regular carbon chatos, a king does not bring the same carbon chatos as the rest of Yidden, as it mentioned in the Mishnah. By the Yidden, they bring a kizba or a seira, which is in the keva, and the king has to bring the king has to bring a soyer. So it's not the same. So the Gemara says, well, b'kapara the Yom Kippurin. We're speaking over here specifically about the carbon on Yom Kippur. As far as the carbon Yom Kippur is concerned, the king is included with the rest of the call. But the question now on this is, im kain, if so, kainim nami, I should say that the kainim, any kain, not only kain gadol, should also be excluded from this carbon of tum in the Beis Hamikdash. Because leishavu l'kol, b'kapara the Yom Kippurim. Because the kainim, that part that the kain brings is not just for the kain gadol, on Yom Kippur, it's for all the kainim. So he's not included in the Yisayir that is brought for all the Yidden on Yom Kippur. So any kain should not be chayiv in this carbon oil v'yored. And says the Gemara, but they're not completely different. Kainim shavu l'kol b'shar mitzvahs. Any kind that does any other aveda b'sheigig, over there, he brings a regular carbon like all other Yidden, the shana kula, on any day of the year. So therefore, he's not an exception like the Kohen Gadol. But the Gemara asks back, well, if so, by a Kohen Gadol, that detail applies as well. Mashiach nami, hashava b'shar mitzvahs d'shana. We find by the Kohen Mashiach, the Mishnah, the Gemara explained before, that in a case where the Kohen Gadol paskin wrong, together with the Bezdin that also paskin wrong, and all Yidden together with the Kohen Gadol did the same Aveda, his kapara is going to be together with the rest of the tzibur. So I see that the Kohen Gadol in the rest of the year is joined together with the tzibur. So the only thing where the Kohen stands out is on Yom Kippur. It's the same with the Kohenim. The rest of the year, they bring a carbon just like other Yidden. Only on Yom Kippur, they stand out. So if you're saying that the Kohen Gadol is different just because of Yom Kippur, we should say the same by all the Kohenim. So therefore, Ela Rava says that the pshat here of this drasha is a bit different. Eimahachi, Darshan, when it says, Mitoich HaKol, as follows, Mi shechatosai shaveh liyichidim. Who is the one that is chayiv in this carbon oil v'yored regarding the tum and the Beis Hamikdash only if his chatos is the same like a yachid regarding how the aveda was done? Which means that by a regular yid, what is he chayiv a carbon chatos for? A regular shaygig in the Maisa, as we learned before here in this Pedic, that he forgot what he's doing. He didn't realize what he's doing. A regular shaygig. Or my niyu kahal. That's by all the Yidden. They're chayiv a carbon chatas for a regular shaygig. What's the halacha by a Kohen Gadol? A Kohen Gadol is an exception. He's not chayiv a carbon chatas for a regular shaygig. The only time a Kohen Gadol is chayiv a carbon chatas is if he was first a helam davar, he made a mistake in a psak din, and then as a result of that, he went and did something b'shaygig. So because the nature of his carbon chatas is completely different than Yechidim, and it's only by the Kohen Gadol, not by regular Kohenim. Therefore, by him, we say he's not included in the Toich HaKahal in this pasuk, so he doesn't bring this carbon oil v'yored regarding what this pasuk is speaking about, which is Tumas Mikdash v'Kadashav. And then the Mishnah said, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Hanasi mevi sa'ir, that the Nasi will bring a sa'ir by the carbon oil v'yored. He will not bring the regular carbon oil v'yored, but he will always bring a goat. So where do we see this? Amar Rabbi Yechanan. So first the Gemara says Rabbi Yechanan said, "Amar Rabbi Eliezer Ela betumas mikdash v'kedoshav." He's only talking about not all karbanos elevated. He's talking specifically about this one that Rab Shimon was talking about before. The karban elevated for being tamei in the Beis Hamikdash or eating kachim. What's the reason? Hayol v'nema kares boy kibekvua. Since when a person becomes tamei in the Beis Hamikdash, there's a chi of kares. By the other scenarios of a karban elevated, for example, false testimony, false swearing, there's no karban, there's no kares. Over here, walking to the Beis Hamikdash tamei, there's kares. So therefore, just like we find by a regular karban chatos, which is brought for an aveda, which b'mezid is kares, that the kohen gadol does not bring. Sorry, we're not talking about the kohen gadol here. We're talking about the nasi. So the nasi does not bring a karban like every other yid. He brings a sa'ir as opposed to a kizba and a seira. So too regarding this Thomas Migdash Kedasha, where this kares, that exception of the nasi applies as well. That he brings a sa'ir. Rav Papa says, it's logical to say that what Rabbi Eliezer says is only speaking about this specific karban, the karban of Tumas Migdash Kedasha. If Rabbi Eliezer was talking about all the karbanos Eilev and saying that always the nasi brings that soyer, so let's see soyer, nasi, the soyer that the nasi brings. That he's an exception regarding his karban chatas. Upar Mashiach. And then the Kohen Gadol also has an exception with his Aveda B'Shegik. He doesn't bring the regular karban like all Yidden, he brings a par. So B'makim Yachid L'chatos. That's instead of the regular karban chatos that a Yachid brings. Koi. So they're different. Both, just like the Nasi is different, the Kohen Gadol is also different regarding a regular karban chatos. So if so, why would Rabbi Eliezer say that only the Nasi is different by all karbanis elevated? So Nisni Nami, you should say Mashiach Mevi Par. That just like the nasi is different, that he brings a soyer. So, but for the kohen gadol, he's also different, and he brings a par, and that's by all of the karbanos elevated. B'shmiyas kayel ubitis v'sayim. That includes by also false testimony or by swearing falsely. So, what's the reason why dafka the nasi is an exception here? The fact that the Mishnah did not say that we make this exception also regarding the Kohen Mashiach, Shmam Yina Atumas Mikdash v'Kedashav Koi. Therefore, we know that it only refers to the Tumas Mikdash v'Kedashav, and that's why it doesn't bring up the Kohen Gadol, because the Mashiach potter. Because Rabbi Eliezer holds like Rab Shimon's opinion that says that the Kohen Gadol doesn't even bring b'chlal that carbon of Tumas Mikdash v'Kedashav, as we just learned out from the pasuk Mitoich Hakol. How do you know that the Pshat in Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is because he holds also like Rab Shimon? Dilma, I can tell you, Rabbi Eliezer akulinkoi. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer, when he says that the Nasi brings a sa'ir, he's referring to all of the scenarios of the carbon elevated, not only the Tumas Migdash Kedasha. Now, your question was, if so, why wouldn't we make the same distinction regarding the Kohen Gadol? Or Mashiach, that is because when it comes to the Kohen Mashiach, Savala Rabbi Akiva, he holds like Rabbi Akiva that we quoted before, the Omar, Mashiach Pata B'Kulan, that the Kohen Gadol is Pata of bringing any of these karbanos of elevated, as Gemara Darshan before. That's why it doesn't bring up the Kohen Gadol. Amalei. So here the Gemara is now mechadish regarding Rabbi Akiva's opinion. Rabbi Akiva, even this that we learned before in Number Aleph, that Rabbi Akiva holds that a Kohen Gadol, he can't bring the mincha, so he doesn't bring any of the karbanos eilev v'yayid, but mi patale mi par. Does he pater him of bringing the par, that bull that a Kohen Gadol has to bring when he does an Aveda B'Shegig? So this is a new Chiddush Gemara saying here that according to Rabbi Akiva, even if he does not bring any of the Karbanis Eilev V'Yayid, that means he doesn't bring those Karbanis that the Titus says in the parasha of Eilev V'Yayid. But the par that he brings by a Chatas, Rabbi Akiva holds that he does bring. Now, V'Sulay Midi, there's nothing else to be said about this, so therefore we can't say Rabbi Eliezer is saying what he's saying based on Rabbi Akiva, because according to Rabbi Akiva, you do bring a par. So if so, the Mishnah should have, Rabbi Eliezer should have said that not only is a Nasi an exception, Kohen Mashiach is also an exception, that he brings a par, and not the Eilev V'Yayid. So the fact that Rabbi Eliezer doesn't say that, it means he doesn't hold like Rabbi Akiva. But Rabbi Yechanan said, Maida Rabbi Eliezer will agree, She'ein Mevi Osham Toli. That's what we're speaking about over here, the Gerson here on the side, that the Nasi does not bring an Osham Toli. In other words, even though Rabbi Eliezer is saying that the Nasi, he always brings his Sa'ir, even by Eilev V'Yayid, he brings his Sa'ir that we have by his Chatos, but not a Osham Toli. Now, Tanak, Tani Tana Kamed Rav Sheshes. There was a Tana that taught in front of Rav Sheshes that Asham Toloi Ba Al Tumas Mikdash V'Kadoshav. That an Asham Toloi is brought for Tumas Mikdash V'Kadoshav. That's what this Tana taught. Why? Because since this is a case of Kodesh, like there is Kodesh by Tumas Mikdash V'Kadoshav, like a regular Chatas, and there the din of Asham Toloi applies. So he said the same applies that that you bring the Asham Toloi. Amalei. So he said, Rav Sheshes said to this Tana, mani. According to who are you saying this? And he was saying this also regarding the Nasi, that the Nasi will bring this Asham Tali in this case. Who are you saying this according to? Rabbi Eliezer? He's saying this according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. The Amad Rabbi Eliezer said, Hoyel v'nema boy kodes kebekvua maisi Nasi soir alel. That the rule that it said before, that by a Nasi, by any case where there's kodes b'mezid, what do you bring for a shaygig? You bring a sire, and therefore for Tumas Mikdash Kadashav as well, you bring a sire, and therefore you're saying that for him it should also apply to bring an Asham Tali, but that's not true because Rabbi Yochanan already said Meider Rabbi Eliezer, that Rabbi Eliezer is Meider She'ein Mevi Asham Tali, that you do not, the Nasi does not bring an Asham Tali in this case, even though you do bring the sire, but Asham Tali you do not bring. So for Kashya, this is a question on this Braisa that this Tana taught in front of Rav Sheshes. Hadran Allah, Kayim Mashiach. We shall return to you the second Perek of Horayos, Perek Kayim Mashiach.
We left till the Kasha.